Acoustic design turns on two distinct groups of knowledge. On the one hand, you have the architectural thinking about what the space should be, what it wants to be, and how the people are going to relate to it. On the other hand, you have the physical science of room acoustics, and that is the study of how the sound behaves in the room. And these two have to flow together so that you have a meeting of minds between the expert in room acoustics and the architectural expert who can think of what the room should be. The sound is part of the space that the architect makes. It's a serious error to think that the sound is something that you can fix up after the event, because the form of the room and the sound have to be one thing in the experience of the audience, and particularly in the experience of the musicians. There are 5 different practical things that we make. I call these the nuts and bolts of making a room for sound. First of all, there's the musical dynamics. We have to make the room so that it supports loud and soft, and particularly that supports the pianissimo, these magic moments when the sound hangs in the space like a whispered blessing, and it doesn't just turn into no sound. So that's the first one, the musical dynamics. The second one is clarity. Most people prefer to hear the detail of the music so long as hearing the detail doesn't obscure other aspects of the sound that they want to hear. The third is the reverberation. That's the long persisting sound in the space. In a room such as this, it lasts for 2 to 2.5 seconds after the sound stops sounding. And that's the deep presence of the room. Every room has a presence like that, but in concert halls it's particularly important. The fourth one is that people like the feeling of being enveloped by the sound. And this is a function which I had a large part in discovering in 1967, that the lateral reflected sound is hugely important in making the sense of involvement and envelopment in the sound of the orchestra. And the final one, the fifth one, is the need for the musicians to feel comfortable in space so that they can play together in ensemble. So those are the 5 nuts and bolts of the room acoustics. We have all the computer aids now that enable us to trace where the sound goes to from every surface, so that every square centimeter of surface in this room is contributing to the impression at a particular seat. And it's particularly important on stage, where the musicians are hearing one another. And that is what we do. We trace where the sound goes to, we calculate it, and we form the room with the architect so that all of those good things happen. Thinking of the various surfaces, we have the surface where the audience sits, and around the surfaces where the audience sits, are the surfaces that feed the reflections to the audiences on a first bounce, so that sound hits the surface and then it comes to the audience. And then we have later surfaces which have a first bounce and a second bounce and come to the audience. It's quite straightforward, really. That is what forming the room is all about. These surfaces here, near where I'm sitting, are surrounding the seating areas that are immediately behind me. And you'll notice that they have surface features, knobs and bumps. The reason for that is that if you are sitting close to a strong reflection, you can have a false localization of the instrument. It's very disconcerting. I was in the Metropolitan Opera in New York and listening to a piece of music, and suddenly the trombone was up here somewhere. It's very disconcerting. So where the surfaces are close to the seats, like this, we make them rough. And that scatters the sound, so it's a little bit weaker, but it's more dispersed. So that's why you see knobs and bumps on some of the surfaces. It's something that can easily be overdone. So we limit the surfaces that we diffuse so that it's meaningful diffusion. It's not arbitrary spraying of diffusing surfaces everywhere. It's meaningful diffusion, and it can actually contribute to the architectural ensemble of the room as a whole. There are two schools of thought. One school of thought is that the architecture and the room acoustics are natural enemies, that vision always predominates over sound. We completely reject that view. On the other hand, every building conveys meaning. There's a rhetoric in the story that the building tells to the people who are going to use it. And that meaning can be shared between the acoustician, if he is also an architect as I am, and the designing architect. And that sharing of meaning is the site at which a meeting of minds can take place. And in this room, it's really quite unique because it has a double space. It is two nested spaces, one inside the other. The outer space has a really important acoustic function for the reverberation, and the inner space, which is formed by the seating and the close surfaces, is designed to produce the gratifying sense of envelopment and clarity and strength, all of which are well known in this room. It's always such a pleasure to come back and hear the sound in here because it is very good. At the meeting with Jean Nouvel, it was actually in Biarritz, would you believe, in a hotel in Biarritz. I sketched the idea of the nested spaces. And because Jean had the idea already that the outer space would be the way into the inner space, so that people would actually move through the outer space on their way to their seat. It was a meeting of minds. And so this wonderful space occurred through a meeting of minds between Jean and myself. Room acoustics merges the psychology of what we hear with the mathematics of the way sound behaves in spaces. And that, of course, is a branch of physics. So all of those disciplines are necessary. But there's another factor which is not a scientific discipline and which this room has in wonderful measure, and that is presence. A really wonderful space has a presence which is immediately apparent when you enter it. I'm sure you feel it here. Presence appeals primarily to your senses, not to your intellect. And it's really a counter to the Cartesian view of the world which has dominated since the Enlightenment. You know, cogito ergo sum. Well, I would say sensio ergo sum. I feel, therefore I am. And that's why the theologians are particularly interested in the idea of presence. So the usual attendances are in the high 90%, which that tells you a lot about the room, that people enjoy coming here. And irrespective of the genre of music, the room is still full. So this means that we have succeeded in our aim of making this part of Paris a new hub for musical endeavor. Well, of course, when a concert hall opens, there is a phenomenon which is often called first night euphoria. And this means everybody wants to say some good thing about the hall. It is a huge human endeavor when you think of the cost per seat of a room like this. It is a huge community endeavor to make such a room, and everybody wants to say some good thing about it. After 3 or 4 years, when it's in continuous use, then you start to understand, simply because of the way it's used, whether it is a success or not. And if you have attendances in the high 90% for virtually all the functions that you have here, it means that you have won. I remember Sir Simon Rattle was interviewed about this room, and he concluded with that wonderful phrase, "Lucky Paris." Now, I really valued that opinion very, very highly. And another one that gave me great pleasure, although I've never met the gentleman, he is a man called Tom Service, who is the music critic for The Guardian newspaper. And he wrote a review of the Pierre Boulez's Réponse, which he'd heard here. And it was such a glowing review. It made me feel immediately I wish I'd been there to hear this wonderful performance. These are opinions which you cannot buy. These are opinions which come totally unsolicited from us, and they're extremely encouraging in the life of a concert hall. I think it's important to understand that every time a piece of music is played, every time a song is sung, it is different. In every performance, there are subtleties which involve the audience and the performer and the room. And that is why the presence is so very important. And you cannot bottle that. You cannot can it. It happens in the moment. And that is one of the most fantastic things about music, that in the moment it moves humans deeply in their spirits and makes them better people, actually.